Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at a British Standards find the fault question. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this example drawing, an orthographic drawing, and we're going to look to find the examples or areas where British Standards conventions haven't been correctly applied to this drawing. So we'll be looking for things like dimension values being in the right place, the right line types being used, or even having the views correctly orientated. One of the easiest things to look for first is checking that the dimension values are placed in the correct position. Now what we would normally do is check that our dimension values are either on top of the line if it's a horizontal dimension, going from left to right, so making sure the dimension value is on top of the line and in the centre. And for any vertical dimensions, making sure that the number is placed to the left of the dimension line. So in this example, we can see that this dimension value is not correctly placed. It should be written in here. So that's one example of a fault. And we can also see that for this dimension here, it's a circle, but it's given as a radius. Now, if we've got a complete circle, what we would look to do is give that as a diameter value. So the value would be diameter 60. Positioned in exactly the same way with the same type of leader line and dimension arrow, but just given it a different format. And that's because we only use a radius dimension for an incomplete circle or an arc or a curve. The next thing to check for is making sure that the right line types have been used and been applied in the correct positions. So for a start, what we can see is that on this circle here, we've been given a centre line. However, on the one over here, a centre line hasn't been added, and we would add that with a long dash, short dash, long dash, short dash, long dash, and the same going horizontally as well. We can then see for the cutting plane through the middle, that would also be given as a long dash, short dash, although it's got these thick ends with the arrows pointing to the direction of the cutting plane. But you can see that the line type through the middle isn't quite accurate. It again should be long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short. At this point, we would want to check that our views have been orientated correctly. And in this case, the plan is not positioned the right way around. It is in the correct position, it is above the elevation, but what you can see here is that this section here, whilst it does line up with the elevation, it would actually be at the front, and that's because the entire plan is orientated backwards. We would need to rotate that round 180 degrees. Another thing to check for is that your labels are all correctly positioned. And you can see that for the plan view here, the label plan is missing. And normally what we would do is we would make sure these are all printed in capital letters below the view, away from any dimension values. If a drawing has a sectional view, which this one does, what we also need to check is that the hatching lines, the diagonal lines, go in the correct direction. And in this case, you can see that there's two separate components, one here and one here. That means that the hatching lines should go in opposite directions. So what we would have is that on this left hand side, we would have those hatching lines actually change direction, and instead of going in the same direction as the ones on the right, they would go in the opposite direction. It's really important that you're aware of these sorts of questions because they're good practice to make sure that you understand what correct British Standards conventions look like, and so that you can apply them in your own drawings. A lot of the mistakes we see on this drawing are ones that pupils commonly make when they're doing their own orthographic work. So again, it's really important that you make sure that you're applying all the correct British Standards conventions, making sure dimension values are in the right position, making sure that all of your views are correctly labelled and they're orientated the right way around, making sure that you've got the correct dimension structure or the correct format, so making sure you're using a diameter or a radius in the correct way, making sure that you're selecting the right line type, and also making sure that if it is a sectional view you're doing, that you've got your hatching lines organised in the correct direction.